Hello guys, this is Axter from the Players Council, and today I'm going to break down the principle of Fellowship block. In this format I have no extra adjustments as I would have in Movie block, where I selected, for example, Galadriel later redeemed to be crossed out of the format. So Fellowship block stays exactly as it is, or as it was during the Deciphers era. So we are talking about editions 1, 2, 3, Fellowship of the Ring, Mines of Moria and Realms of the Elf Lords. In this format, it works in a sort of a rock, paper, scissors way. You have 3 basic shadows, and then you have some freebie which try to usually be strong against one, weak against another, and have 50-50% win rate against the last one. So we start with a freebie called Great Pilgrim, and I put there the extra information that it's built around events. So the early stage of the game you want to hide using stealths, and whenever your opponent tries to make some sort of a setup, Uruks for instance try to prepare a handful of Uruks that will kill you, then you usually break that setup by playing Foul Creation. Same goes with Moria. Whenever your opponent plays many conditions and it looks like he will be able to kill you, then you simply play Sleep Caradhras and you discard his setup. As for the Nazgul, what you do is that you try to maximize your efforts on board. That means companions are going to die, you are going to see a lot of dangerous situations, but eventually you will survive. In order to survive against all 3 of the shadows, you need to play carefully, but this deck is very capable of being strong against everything. So to confirm our graph of what it would look like for this freebie plus particularly, against Nazgul, this deck would do fairly well, although it could get stopped by it, so that's the 50-50 matchup. Then against Moria, this deck is very strong. Lots of events that add strength. Each companion to some extent says that Swarm is going to have a hard time defeating it, simply also because there are 9 companions in the deck. So Swarm needs to put a lot of effort in to kill these 3 peoples specifically. And as for Uruks, it is very difficult to make double moves for this deck, even with Foul Creation. It is probably not going to die to it, but you might see a situation when your opponent runs away. Now another 3 peoples which I prepared is the Alliance setup. Why is it a setup? Because as you can see, there are lots of cards that you can play on your companions. Possessions usually, but also conditions. And getting allies on board is also super useful for you, because the more stuff you have on board, the more tricks you are able to pull up your sleeve and then survive the sight, or even make a double move. So what is the curve here? If you go against Uruks, it depends on how good your equipment draw is, but I would say you have a 50-50 matchup against it. And as for extra safety, you have Foul Creation to discard Saruman and then kill Uruks easily, except for Troop of Uruk-hai. So definitely a playable matchup, depends on the draw. As for Nazgul, they are going to have a very hard time against these 3 peoples, because there are so many cards that make your companions extra strong. For example, Wemegil and Asphaloth in combination with Arwen's ability make their 13 strength, and she's even able to add extra strength by using Wemegil's ability. And if you are on planes, you get +2 extra strength, so this is super crazy and very hard for Nazgul to deal with. And as for Moria, there is not much protection against that shadow, except for direct wounding. As you can see, there aren't any special cards protecting your Ring Bearer, so it really comes down to whether you are able to play all the necessary wounding cards early and be able to survive. If you have bad draw, then Moria can punish you very hard. Now we get to the last three peoples, which I'm going to mention, and those are pipes. I named this deck Sustain because what this deck likes is to stop for a second, heal up using the pipes abilities. You discard a pipe with possession, which is either Longbottom Leaf or Old Toby, and then given by how many pipes you have on board, Frodo's pipe in the deck, Aragorn's pipe in the deck, which doesn't necessarily need to be carried by Aragorn, but may be carried by Boromir as well, and the last but not least is Gandalf's pipe. There is also extra potential to heal companions X times. That means you do not heal a single companion many times. That means you heal once Greenleaf, once Aragorn, once Gandalf. But with Frodo's pipe you want to heal one companion three times, for example. So it takes a bit of practice to distribute your wounds from minions as you go, so that you are able to efficiently heal up. But even so, this deck is usually very resilient given its sustained nature. So, as for the shadows, against Nazgul, this deck is going to have a hard time early because Nazgul are good on the first few sites. We are going to take a look at that in a second. What it excels at, on the other hand, is dealing with Moria, because you have ways of direct wounding. It is essentially a choke. That means that you do not pay that much Twilight. The 2 Twilight tokens removed each fellowship phase are actually crucial for you, because you usually play Gandalf early, when all the minions are roaming, and then you can play also Betrayer of Isengard, which prevents Moria from getting out of hand. And if the conditions get out of hand, you just splash them with Steep Caradhras. When they play minions and try to swarm you, you kill them with Greenleaf, perhaps with Aragorn's bow, which should be here twice, now that I look at it. But that's just a detail, we are looking at the core of the Free Peoples. And once you are exhausted from killing off those dangerous minions, then what you do is that you stay on the side, you heal up using the pipes, as I have mentioned a while ago, and then you are ready to go again. So very difficult for Moria to beat this. As for Uruks, that is going to be the 50-50 matchup here again, because Uruks don't get that much Twilight by these Free Peoples, so it is very difficult for them to kill it. However, an experienced Uruk-hai player will wait for a double move and then punish these Free Peoples, because if you make a double move, there are no wounds that your core of the deck is able to heal up, and therefore the Uruks will use the extra Twilight on the double move and try to kill companions, which hurts this deck badly. So I hope I explained the core of what the Free Peoples try to do, and now let's take a look at the shadows. The first one are Uruks, probably the best shadow on Fellowship, because of their ability to stop the opposing Free Peoples. This game has always been, in most of its formats, Free Peoples oriented. That means that trying to win by shadow, even if your opponent makes single moves, is usually very difficult. But Uruks are able to kill the opponent's Free Peoples with the highest percentage of possibility. Now, why is that? Because of two things. Firstly, Savagery, to match their numbers, keeps the companion count at bay. That means that if your opponent has 5 companions, you are usually able to overwhelm even key companions by using Savagery to match their numbers. And then on the third region, that means sites 7, 8, 9, when the sites are expensive, I'm going to show you really quickly, especially the 9th site, where each Isengard minion is Twilight cost -1. Then you are able to swarm your opponent, who has suffered from Savagery to match their numbers throughout the whole game, and then you are able to kill him, finally. Of course, it is not that simple, and your opponent is going to try to avoid that fate, but Generally, Uruks are able to firstly keep your opponent's double moves at bay, and secondly kill them off if necessary. Now let's take a look at another shadow. Nazgul. Nazgul are typical for their power spike early. That, on the other hand, makes them very squishy, because if the draw is bad, and it can be, then it is very difficult to stop, for example, your opponent's alliance, which we have seen a while ago. That was the deck around Greenleaf and Arwen and Aragorn and many equipments. So this is the side that is very important for Nazgul. What happens is that your opponent goes on side 2 and on side 3 immediately. That means you get around 12 Twilight, if he's that bold. Then you play your first Nazgul for free, typically Kantea. You have still your 12 Twilight tokens on board, and you can play Atea, and you can play a discounted Witch King by Morgul Gates. That on its own is usually a very strong attack, and your opponent is going to pay for the double move with Companions Lost. On the other hand, what you can do is stop on side 2, but then you are giving the Nazgul Shadow player an opportunity to outrun you. He's going to be the one standing on side 3 then, and you are going to have a harder time chasing him down. What this deck generally doesn't like is, of course, Flaming Brand, which is a card that in my opinion never should have been printed, because it is just too easy of a way how to deal with this shadow. But that's just my personal opinion. The last one that we are going to take a look at is Moria. What this deck excels at is cycling through your hand. The cards which you do not need are easily discarded by their coming, and you get value from that, because you just discard 3 possessions that you already have, such as Aragorn's Pipe, which is on board, Aragorn's Bow, which is on board, and also, for example, Legolas's Bow of Galadrim, which I didn't even show today, but just to show you. You discard these 3 cards, then you play Goblin Scavengers from your discard pile, which play Goblin Scimitar, which then draws a card for you, and the card could be another Goblin Scavengers. So you play them, you play another Scimitar, you draw another card, and you are on your way to swarming your opponent. If your opponent tries to outrun you, or generally has a very good draw, then you use Cave Troll to your advantage to stop him otherwise. This deck has a potential to kill decks which are small, because it tries to add extra Twilight by its minions and possessions. And if the draw is bad, this deck can punish the opponent really hard. A key factor of this shadow has always been side 8, around which it is necessary to learn how to play. Once we get to some videos about advanced tactics of Fellowship block and Movie block, I'm going to definitely mention this again. So what it is about is that if you play against a player with Nazgul, and he is on side 7, has a perfectly strong Fellowship, but your Fellowship is also very strong, you are on side 7 too, and your opponent is about to move to side 8. You know that you are not going to kill him, but what you can do is that you can stop him by this side's ability. That prevents him from moving again, and then your 3 peoples, which you know is not going to die against his Nazgul, can make the double move, because he does not play 5 orcs in his deck. It's a very useful mechanic for this shadow and makes it even more dangerous. And therefore, this deck also deserves place in the top 3 of the shadows in this format. So those are the 6 basic 3 peoples and shadows all together. Now I'm going to mention and comment on some of the other options in the Fellowship block format. There are some options how to play, for instance, Corruption, but it is usually very difficult to corrupt your opponent because of Sam. I'm going to show you some basic build of Corruption in Fellowship block could look like. Something like this, and if few copies of Sea. Yes. Then we want to play Balrog and events that add burdens. So generally, this deck can kill your opponent if he doesn't know what you play. Firstly, that's your first condition to win, and secondly, if the draw for your opponent is really bad. But the draw can be gone around if you know what your opponent is playing. If you know that he plays Corruption, then you can actually change your starting Fellowship and start with some Son of Hamfast, which removes burdens like crazy, and then this deck does not have any option, any possibility how to kill you. So that's why this deck is squishy and doesn't see much play. There are some wounding options such as Moria Archers that didn't get a very nice setup of cards in the 3 Fellowship block formats, in the 3 Fellowship block editions, I mean, because Moria Archer Troop, an essential minion in this deck, is very expensive. You are maximally able to stop your opponent, but then if you take a look at the mathematics, for just 1 Twilight, your opponent plays a Hobbit, and that's 4 archery shots that you need to put on board to be able to kill your opponent's Fellowship. On the other hand, to get rid of that 1 Twilight value, you need to play 2 Moria Archer Troops, so that's 12 Twilight. But then again, your opponent has Sanctuary on his way, so that's why this deck is very difficult to play successfully. Much more successful might be the Mordor Orcs because of their conditions. There are conditions like Orc Bowman, which adds archery to the minion archery total, and Under the Watching Eye. But of course, cards like Sleep Caradhras, which discards conditions in a very fast way, or with the Elves Secret Sentinels, which discards just about those conditions that you had a hard time putting on board as easily as Sleep Caradhras. So that's why it's squishy as well and doesn't see that much of a play. On the other hand, if the opponent's draw is bad, then you are able to pull it off as well. There are also some other options how to play. You can, for example, play mixed cultures. You can play Nazgul with Mordor Orcs. Why? Well, because the problem of Nazgul is they are not able to finish off the already wounded companions. So what you want to do is play the classic core of the Nazgul build, and then you want to finish off companions using the hate card. And an extra bonus for this deck is that on side 9 it is not an auto loss, because you know that your orcs are going to create swarm on your devastated opponent's peoples. So a very strong strategy that not many people know about. And one more combination that I'm going to talk about is going to be the Morsengard, as I like to call it, or the combination of Moria and Isengard. This is essentially a setup strategy. It is a sort of an all-in, and you combine the ability of your Moria minions to create swarm, and because your opponent usually has companions like Greenleaf that do directed wounds, and Aragorn's Bow as equipment that does directed wounds, and also Roomail that does directed wounds at your minions which have 1 vitality. You rely on Isengard Warrior's ability to cancel those special abilities and then kill Frodo. It's a very useful strategy. On the other hand, if you play, for example, against Grey Pilgrim, which always has that Aragorn Ranger of the North and can swallow your all-in attack on one of the crucial sites on the path, then that is usually very difficult to beat. But everything is playable, you will have lots of fun with the Fellowship block format. I think that today I covered most of the basics, and that should help you try to select and build your deck. Thank you for your attention.